Can I
Okay,
get three more?
No, you cannot watch your soaps by,
so we're going to cover performance appraisals at the university today, and this is a topic that has actually multiple modules. We're going to cover multiple topics today because we are rolling out this on actually effective now to be due July 1st. And so some of you may have already done performance appraisals of your staff. Some of you may have experienced performance appraisals yourself. And as you probably know, this is a topic that really raises some anxiety amongst people. And so just to ask you a question, what do you think causes that in people? Why do you think people get anxious about being reviewed or going through a performance appraisal?
Because people are being judged.
Perfect, yes. And sometimes they don't know necessarily what that judgment is going to be about. And so if they can't quite know what to expect, it's a little scary. And employees like to work for great leaders and great bosses. If they don't know what to expect, they don't know what they are going to achieve through their leader, that often is a reason for leaving during exit questionnaires or surveys. So a survey that, excuse me, that was done of about 80,000 managers indicated that one of the top reasons that employees leave are because of their supervisors or managers, not because of their organization or coworkers. So one of the reasons they're looking for in their supervisor is really about what the expectations are, to get some feedback and to know that they're contributing to the employer, the organization's mission. So what we're going to do today is talk about performance management. What is it? We'll talk about why do performance appraisals and supervisors' roles and responsibilities in the process, as well as look at the performance appraisal form. We'll look at the SMART goals, or trying to write a SMART goal, and what that's comprised of, as well as objectives, and ways we can align with the organizational's goals. The last thing really that we were going to achieve today, or to accomplish, is career development, or talk a little bit about that. My intent was to also give you some additional tools for the next step, which is once you gather all that information and you're ready to do a performance appraisal, what are some of the things that you should keep in mind as a supervisor? And the reason I say that is because that some people are already doing performance appraisals. They are already setting goals. And so this is to give you some additional tools or techniques and tips to take that forward. So we'll cover appraisal and feedback at a stopping point, but we'll cover those topics as well as the tools and techniques that right now you already have in your possession. Okay? So first of all, what is performance management? Performance management is a two-way street. It's a collaborative process between managers and supervisors and employees to identify goals and objectives, to talk about ways to develop employees, and to discuss ways to improve their performance. Some programs do allow for discussion of goals and objectives, as I mentioned. Some programs do not. They're strictly about talking about performance. But doing the next cycle's goals and objectives are really important to give the employee some way to figure out where they're going. Some programs talk about employee career development, and the university's program does that. So we have these two elements. Some performance management programs cover pay for performance, or they're based on that. This particular one at the university at this time does not. But the outcome is very similar to what other organizations do, and that's to align and achieve organizational goals. So let's do a quick poll here and find out from your perspective, have you conducted a formal written performance appraisal, and do you do it annually for your direct reports? Okay. So 25% so say yes, and 75% said no. It's actually very similar to what I saw last week, so you know. So the next poll. Have you received a formal written performance appraisal? Okay, so that's a little different than last week. We actually had some people who did go through it. So what we'll be talking about today is really your perspective as a supervisor. Okay, just because of time, that's what we're going to cover. There's another session for employees and that perspective, but we'll leave that for another day. But why would we do performance appraisals? Well, first of all, Board of Regents policy identifies that it's done, it should be done annually, and I'll show a slide here that covers that policy in just a minute. The other thing for us to know as leaders of the organization is that part of the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities for our campuses, the universities, UAA, UAF, they have standards for accreditation, and it specifically identifies that the administrators and staff are evaluated regularly with regard to performance of work duties and responsibilities. I mean, the third point there is, just as HR professionals would know, that this is just part of capital development, our human capital investment, and it's great for retention. It's great for engagement, and that's what we want to do, is make sure that employees are contributing to the goals and the mission of the organization. And for retention purposes, you know, when you have to recruit for and fill a position, I mean, it can range from at least 100 to 150% of that person's salary. And for executives, it can go much higher, 200% and higher. And so trying to make sure that when we do a hiring or make a hiring decision and we go through that process, that we do want to make sure that we do it correctly, we do it accurately, we're concise as we're explaining to people what we're expecting from them. So I talked about the policy, the Board of Regents policy, and how that's designated in there regarding performance evaluations or appraisals. And so the highlighted portion up here explains a little bit more about what I suggest we focus on, but that people are evaluated annually. And the components for the performance appraisal or evaluation includes position duties, responsibilities, and the purpose as defined by the supervisor. We're going to talk about, with our employees, performance, conduct. We'll review their progress, and if it's appropriate, to plan for more effective performance. And that's kind of the second half of the session that I'd like to share information with you about. We will give the employee the opportunity to ask questions about their work assignments and performance expectations. And the written evaluation should be sufficiently specific to inform and guide the employee toward achieving those major goals and objectives. And again, as you can see, as identified or determined by the supervisor. The employee will have an opportunity to respond to the performance evaluation in writing. The reason I wanted to go through that is when we look at the performance evaluation or appraisal form, that'll all make sense as to why those components are there. It's because it's specifically identified here in the policy. Okay, so what happens if someone has a question about the performance appraisals done by the manager? So I say begin with the end in mind. Know kind of the full picture as a supervisor or manager. This is the full process or the end process. So if an employee has a concern or question about the evaluation, the policy also provides for an administrative review. And you can see highlighted the performance evaluation. The employee's process is to share that with the supervisor first informally, try to resolve it with the immediate supervisor, and if it's not resolved, the employee may request an administrative review by the university, the campus human resource office, the regional human resource office. In this case, for statewide, it would be Eric C-Step. It does say, it's not highlighted, but it should be pointed out, that last sentence, the director may conduct a review, decline a review, or refer the matter to an administrative process. So there's some discretionary decision making there. Okay, so what is the supervisor's role and responsibilities? And you have the handout there. It's actually part of one at the back, so we'll get to that when we cover that slide. But the role is really to manage resources effectively. And what that means, resources are not just physical facilities and so forth, equipment, but also your employee, the human capital. And these are the responsibilities which specify or are more specific about performance appraisal and what that means about providing feedback or providing some direction on goals and objectives. The other part of the supervisor's role and responsibilities are really to know the applicable law, the Board of Regents policy, and the university regulations. The little hand there just means that there's a handout somewhere in the attachments that you have. This particular one is actually half of or part of another handout, and like I said, we'll get to that here in a few slides. So I'm sharing some information with you from my own experience as a supervisor. I've evaluated 3 to 13 employees, setting up goals, objectives, doing a 3-month, a 6-month review, and an annual review. And this I found helpful, and you don't have to use it. It's just a tool that you could choose to use if you have multiple employees. And what you're going to see in your handout, again, you can create your own, but this just gives you an idea for keeping track of doing the review. You see here the employee names, so you just want to list your employee names down here, their job title, whether you have the position description. If you don't, then you know that's something you need to obtain, because that's critical to doing a performance evaluation. The date of hire, when you notify the employee of if you want their self-evaluation or their input, that you've done that, and that's difficult if you have 10, 12 employees that you're supervising. If you're doing 1 or 2, it's not as much of a problem, but these also can be the steps that you use if you choose to get a self-evaluation from the employee, what the due date is, that you've let them know clearly what the due date is, the date that you're planning on doing the appraisal and drafting your comments, the date of the conversation, as well as when you finalize the document and when you've sent that into HR. And then if there are any comments that you want to add, maybe there was a disagreement, you're checking back into the information or following up. Whatever you'd like to do, but that's just a worksheet. It's a draft. Like I said, you can use it, you can choose not to use it. The rollout implementation of the performance appraisal process. The appraisal's completed goals and objectives are due July 1st, 2014. You can start now. That is one of the elements that we are asking from people, that at a minimum, that if there are any position description changes, that you're identifying that you're reviewing the format with the employee, at least introducing the form to them, talking about some of the definitions, the categories, formulating the employee's goals and objectives. Now, this right now applies to statewide employees, and this is what we're doing the training, and the group that we're conducting training sessions on are the statewide employees who are in regular positions. We did talk about that, including term employees and extended temporary employees. Is that correct? Extended temps?
And temporary.
I would say until further notice. Right now, it's statewide regular employees, extended temporaries, term employees. It's not required for student employees or temporary employees. Okay. We did want to allow supervisors, because some have already started doing performance appraisals, that if you want to continue, you may certainly do so. So you can use the new performance factors. It's not required. Our goal and objective right now is to make it really clear for employees what the goals and objectives are for them in their position, as well as the factors that they will be evaluated on or discussed, or the discussion will be around or centered around for next year. Okay, so let's look at the performance appraisal form. So the format, there are, you see part 1, performance factors. It goes to page, it's really 5, part 2, 2A, B, and part 3, which are the signatures. So I'll just quickly go to those sections, and then we'll come back to Part 1, the performance factors. So you see Part 2A, employee comments, Part 2B, supervisor comments. That's if the supervisor at the next level would like to make comments or want to provide some input. Otherwise, supervisors can add their comments in the section Part 1. Part 3, the signatures, is really the employee signature and the immediate supervisor signature that's required. The only time the next level supervisor signature is required is if the evaluation is unsatisfactory, so not working out or needs improvement, or as you see on page 4, number 10, Roman numeral 10, needs improvement or not working out. That's the overall rating. And that's, again, if the supervisor chooses to do the rating this period or this cycle. Okay. So let me go back to page 1, which is the performance factors. And you see under that section, page 1, the rating levels are 1 through 5. And the point we wanted to make is that while it's 1 to 5, number 5 as singularly extraordinary is really a rare occurrence. I mean, you can see number 4 is excellent, is actually the top rating for many organizations. And so really that is probably going to be something that's still achievable, but it's still at the top of the rating for most organizations. And we've heard some people talking about how often would you see a 5, a singularly extraordinary. And, you know, I heard some people say 1 in a million, maybe 1 in 1,000, you know, it's going to be rare. So if you look at the ratings and the definitions, really think carefully because number 3, fully proficient, is actually more along the lines of what you'll see for most employees. That's what most employees should be striving for, is to be fully proficient. At the bottom, this is where we were talking about the position description, about supervisors having the performance or the position description in hand and talking about it with the employee, because if some updates need to be made, that's where you're going to check the box and then make the updates in UAK jobs. If no updates are necessary, you would just check that box off at the bottom of page 1. Okay. So what I'm going to just say, because we're not really focused on the performance factors per se, what I do want to say is that the definitions are on the, right now, it's attached to this form. It may not necessarily be attached to forms in the future, but it's on page 6 and 7. So while you're looking at the document and just say, for example, under communication skill and clarity, if you're looking for more detail, it's going to be on the definition, page 6 and 7. Okay, so we talked about that not necessarily being required right now. What you're really going to want to look at is page 4. It's number Roman numeral 8, and then also on page, it'll be page 5, Roman numeral 10, focused on the performance goals for the next appraisal period. And so if you already have goals for the employee, then you would fill that in under section 8. But if not, what you're really focused on this period is section 10, page 5. Okay, so this is where we'll talk about SMART goals and what you do or how you can formulate SMART goals and objectives. But for the next appraisal period, goals and the measurement is what you're going to identify as to how you're going to measure the employee, but then also provide feedback as to how they performed in that category. I'm going to skip past the employee career development portion for right now, because that's going to be a separate discussion. But I just wanted to at least cover the portions with you, because this is what you're going to cover with your employees. This is the area that they will probably have the most questions. So if you identify in your own mind what approach you're taking, are you just really focused on the goals for the next cycle, the next review period. If you've not done an appraisal, you've not set goals, that's what you're focused on for right now. Okay? So writing SMART goals and objectives, how do you do that, and how do you align with the organizational goals? So writing SMART goals, SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, being results-oriented, and time and resource constrained. So you want to have some specificity when you're writing goals or objectives. I actually use this more for objectives personally because sometimes goals in my mind are a little more broad. It's terminology, so semantics as to how you apply it and how you talk about it. But that's why this slide is actually titled SMART Goals and Objectives, because if you do want to have more specificity in your goals, that's fine. Just factor that in as you're looking at some of the terminology or the principles on these slides. And so, for example, I have an example of an action plan, meaning goals, objectives, and action plans are tasks to get to those goals. So you can see by X date, whatever activity you identified is to be done, and the Word document, for example, emailed to me as your supervisor. So this will make more sense as we go into the next slide, but this has a little bit more detail as to who's doing what, whether it's the employee or the supervisor. Okay, so let's just talk about writing a SMART goal or objective. And this would be set up as a workshop, but for purposes of right now just recording and getting the information out quickly, we won't take the time to have you write down one of your goals or objectives. But what I would suggest as you are formulating your goals and objectives, identify in your mind what you're going to achieve for the next year. You yourself as a supervisor, what you'd like to achieve with your reports, your direct reports. Some of the goals and objectives that you'd like to see. Think about your reports, the people who report to you, what their roles are. And then you can see this is where the position description and knowing what they do, how that fits into where you're going to place their strengths, their skill sets, into carrying out that objective or the goal. So now this is talking a little bit more about aligning with an organizational goal. So I'm going to share this with you, and then I'll give you a specific example so we can see how this plays out. So for example, the organizational goals. Now this is really, really high level. I know that there's going to be some information updating the themes here with effect statements probably in the next month or so, but I should say the next month meaning April. But in this case, what I have are the 5 UA themes, and I'm just going to pick one, the highlighted one here as far as accountability to the people of Alaska. I'm going to either you can take this forward as department goals, employee goals and objectives, what their action plan, how you're going to measure, and any additional resources that are going to be needed to carry that out. Okay, so we'll play this out a little bit so you can see. Some people like to see or call it cascading goals, and they like to see this format. So this could work too. I'm just showing you another graphical example. But cascading goals where you have the theme, the accountability to the people of Alaska. So then it's going to come down to the department as an example. Not everybody's going to have the same one, but just say it's to ensure quality and efficiencies in the processes and systems in your department. Okay? And that's, again, linked to the accountability to the people of Alaska. So how does that fall and cascade down to the employee? That during fiscal year 2015, their goal is to ensure that work processes and procedures are efficient. That's a goal. Right? Okay, so I'm going with SMART objectives. So, and action plan. So what you're seeing in this one, this was the employee's goal, right? Ensure work processes and procedures are efficient. The objective being by, we could say April 2015, formulate desk procedures manual for efficiency, operational continuity, and management of change. So then that drills down even further for the employee to see as far as action plan. And this is work out with the employee. This is critical. I would suggest, though, starting, either you start it or the employee starts it. And then you can actually work that out. But you could say some of the steps are by, and maybe, if you give this to somebody, just say now, You could say by April 30th, draft an index list of procedures and email to, what I've learned over time is if you say your supervisor, because, what if you're the supervisor and you choose to transfer, you get promoted, you leave, you don't want the employee to send it to you personally. You want it to be sent to their supervisor. Upon approval, in this case, of the index list, because that's specific, right? And it gives somebody a time when they're going to start. Begin documenting the steps for at least one procedure a week. Provide a monthly progress update to the supervisor via email on the 5th day of each month. So you can see how detailed that is to try to be real specific about a task list. I won't go through all of them, but I'll just stop toward the bottom here. But you could say by April 15th, 2015, submit your desk procedures manual to your supervisor for review. So you just can take it all the way down. In this particular example, which I've used something like this in the past because management of change and continuity is really important for us as an organization, it gives you as an employee, it gives the supervisor some expectation of what's supposed to be occurring. And if I had an employee who finished all of this early or was very detailed, it was very good, that's my way of saying, okay, they've exceeded the expectations. These were the expectations we laid out. They exceeded it. Or if it's more detailed, you can let them know. But the other way, in having them cross-train someone, it allows for that continuity, that ability to have someone else step in if the employee's on family and medical leave or gone for an extended period of time. We also had the employee help to flesh out the procedure, to give more details to the procedure. In fact, sometimes even if we needed to have the employee type them up or add the additions. So there are ways you can use the resources. The other thing about this is if you ask the employee to workflow or chart out the process for something, talk with you about it, one, you give them the chance in one case to write out the process, make the recommendation. In the second case, you let them verbally explain it. So development that's happening at the same time that you're requesting some work being done. But this is the example of SMART objectives. I do want to stress that this isn't scary, this isn't new or different. It's very similar to delegation concepts. This is according to CRISP Publications, which is a publication. It's a real easy to read group of pamphlets or booklets on supervision. So you can see on delegation, and this is something really most supervisors have difficulties with, delegation and how to do it properly. But if we outline clear expectations, we set some timelines, we're available to answer questions and concerns of the employee, give them confidence, reassure them that we know that it might be a stretch goal or a challenge, but we know that they can do it. We're going to provide them tools, support, training, and just follow up with the progress. So you see, this is not writing SMART goals and performance appraisal, not new. This is something we've always done as supervisors. Okay, so career development. On the page 4, I said we were going to come back to it. Excuse me, page 4, employee career development. There are 4 boxes, and you can check any that apply. Whether the employee is interested in new opportunities and the career development plan is approved. Whether they are interested in new opportunities, but we've not completed a career development plan, or if the employee in the 3rd box needs some additional training in their current position to be effective, or if they're working well, they're well placed, and they're content in their position. And so this is kind of a tickler for the supervisor and the employee to have the conversation about where the employee is at. We do want to stress, because career development plans are listed in the university regulation. And I'm going to pull up the next slide so that we can see it. But before I do that, I just want to mention that we do have a separate class that's done and facilitated by Tara Ferguson, in charge of compensation. And she covers career development, she and her staff, and they can answer questions if supervisors, employees have questions about career development plans as stated in the regulation. Okay, so the next slide is the regulation covering career development plans. And you can see it provides an avenue for advancement through job family or a job family that the employee is in. It allows for that if the employee successfully completes established criteria and objectives. So those are identified early on, and these plans are actually subject to the availability of funding based upon need. So the point here is that for some smaller departments, not everybody will have a career development plan. So while we say here in the review form or the appraisal form whether a career development plan is approved or the career development plan is not completed, it's really important for you as a supervisor to know that even though that's not in place, what we can share with you is that if you would like a format for professional development, individual employee professional development, I actually have a draft worked up for that. I share it in the employee class because that's something for them to take ownership of and to work, but I'd be happy to share that with this group maybe at the end or in a one-on-one conversation with you. But for career development purposes, for this particular performance appraisal, I just want to mention that this is what we're referencing as far as employee career development. Any comments, questions? Okay. So it's very specific. There's quite a bit of information, but I just wanted to make sure that you had some information. The career development plan, it needs to be approved in advance by the Chief Human Resources Officer or the designee. So for right now, that would be Eric Seastead or Tara Ferguson. Question? Oh, no question. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So the next steps. Well, let me back up. Actually, that is where we would normally stop if there were, no questions, and we just wanted to make sure so that you knew exactly where you needed to be at this point for July 1st, for meeting the July 1st date. Those are the basic steps. The review form, make sure you talk about it with the employee. Make sure you cover and identify SMART goals and objectives, formulate them. Make sure that you look at the position description, tick that box off, talk about career development and where that's at. The rest of this is sort of what I call the next steps. Sure.
I just want to clarify that for this time, the reason that we're not asking people to go through the first part of this form or evaluate people on the first part of the form is that it's not really fair to your employees to evaluate them on things that they didn't know they were being evaluated on. We do hope that you'll go through the whole form, that together you'll go through and discuss even that first section. That's not necessarily in terms of this is what you're doing right or wrong, more in terms of, look, this is the kind of things I have to evaluate you on next year, so make sure that together we have that dialogue so we all know what we're talking about, so it's not a surprise in 2015.
Right. And thank you for sharing that. And that's part of really trying to be open and have that dialogue with employees. It's not supposed to be a surprise. It's not supposed to cause the anxiety that for most people it does. It's really about having ongoing dialogue throughout the year about what our expectations are and what the supervisor has identified as strengths as well as areas for further development.
I think also to add on to that is that when you're going over this form in terms of the ratings and what to provide, because there's a lot of different supervisors that can be harsh in terms of rating, some are pretty, they could be, they're all fives, so there's one extreme to the other, and there's some in the middle. So I would, explain to your employees too what your thoughts are on how you look at these ratings, and so just the employee doesn't say, oh, you gave me a 3 and that's bad, because like to me a 3 is good. 3 is I'm doing good, I'm doing my job, I'm even doing more than that. So but some people might not see it that way, so I think it's good to kind of give that explanation.
I was thinking using decimal points.
well, you're an accountant, that's why.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between two and three. I mean, the only way I would expect somebody to be fully fully functional in their jobs if they've been in it for a while, and so it's just really hard. So I don't know. I think that you explain it, you discuss it, you say, this is my style, and yeah. I think it's all good, because I think the whole thing about it is that the performance appraisal is not a weapon. It's a discussion, and it's an opportunity to. A lot of times what you think is going on is not necessarily what's going on as a supervisor, and other times, the employee, what they think is going on isn't what you think is going on. So that's just what this is to sync things up and so that you can organize and move on. But,
and that's exactly what performance management is about. It's really about an ongoing dialogue throughout the year. It's not meant to be a once-a-year type of thing like income taxes. I mean, it's really about, well, not for you. I know for you it's a little more ongoing, but for some people. So it's really about trying to have that conversation and work, as I mentioned earlier, collaboratively throughout the year. And those are the points we're going to be coming to as we talk about appraisal and feedback. Okay, so we know that this is something different. It's a change for employees. And so for you to, as a supervisor, recognize this, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the stages, if you will, of managing through change and transition. And this particular model is by William Bridges, and it's actually very well known and used in various industries, but there are 3 phases of transition, and one is the ending, losing something. There's a grief phases that people go through. It's sort of like the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, stages of dying and grief. And so you're going to see that. There are going to be people pushing back, people angry, people upset. Why are we doing this? They don't want to let go. And so you're going to see that in employees. So your employees are going to have questions. We were just talking about earlier, prepare, plan, really think about it early on. How are you going to apply this? Comments that were made earlier, look at the definitions, really let that sink in with you. Think about what's important to you. How are you going to measure or define this? And I have an example as well. I believe you'll see that in your handouts, but you want to have, what does maybe a meeting expectation look like? You definitely want to know, what does an exceptional look like when someone's exceeding, because you have to be able to explain that to employees, because as they're pushing back, for any of us, if they're not comfortable with it, know as much information as you can about why it's important. We talked about that. Why would we do these performance appraisals, and what's the purpose, and what is performance management? That was the foundation of why we started, or how we started this. As employees or individuals accept there's going to be a change, it's going to happen, they start moving through the neutral zone, or what's called the neutral zone. In this area, there's still some question, there's still some things that are unknown, unclear to them, but they are moving closer toward the new beginning. In this stage, though, there are still some examples of creativity or innovation or things that are coming up about how we might be able to apply it. But still, at this point, it's really important for the communication to continue with employees, for the manager or supervisor to continue, for any of us to continue to learn as much as we can and improve our own process, because the new beginning is really when the process has been in place. We are moving forward. Everyone would accept that this is the new process, this is the new form that we're using. And even though, and you'll hear about this, performance management is not really about a form. It's the discussion. It's the process of working with our direct reports. The form is a nice way to be a little checklist or a tickler to say this is to remind us and to have some consistency about what we're doing. So this is to share with you that if your employee's gone through the training, they'll see this. But if they haven't, you may want to talk a little bit about it in a department meeting. If you don't have a chance to do it, just recognize if you see someone who's angry and pushing back, that's probably where they are, right at this stage. Let's just be understanding and compassionate or caring about our employees. Okay? So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will say, as far as tips for implementing change, some things for us to think about as the leader of our work group. You know, really about trying to learn as much as you can, communicate with employees. Communication is the key word. Okay, and this is in your slides, as well as, you know, we'll have information available for you if you do want more information. I do want to say the William Bridges book, Managing Change and Transition, I believe I had that listed as one of your resources. It is a book in our Skillsoft online books 24/7, so you can locate it there. You don't have to buy one. Okay? So appraisal and feedback. These are some of the next topics I want to cover, and we will talk a little bit about some of the cautions that come along with doing a performance appraisal, some of the errors of performance appraisal. So we'll also talk about how to minimize some of the legal problems, some of the common errors, some tips on active listening, not just hearing that someone's talking, but listening. How to give some positive recognition, and I have a handout in there for you, as well as how to handle the difficult conversations, because not everything goes perfectly. Okay, so first of all, good appraisal practices. You know, we want to be clear. We've said that, clear. We need that clarity, some specifics in the standards, our procedures. We want to be consistent in our rating decisions. So when we were talking about, you know, really get a hold of those definitions, think about it. Be consistent with your employees. Be candid. You know, make sure that you're talking about something. Don't sugarcoat something in your evaluation ratings. Your employee's going to hear it 1 year or 1 quarter. They're going to remember it. So the next time you come and have that conversation, you know, or someone else has a conversation with you, you just want to make sure that you're very candid and consistent. And there are going to be individuals who are going to struggle with this. So we want to be understanding, compassionate, caring for those employees who are going to struggle with either the thought of performance appraisal, but also about meeting our expectations. Okay. So active versus passive tense. You can see a couple of examples there. You want to say, oh, good job, the manual was well done. You know, that's pretty passive because we're saying the manual was well done. We're not saying who did it. Versus you, okay, so you completed the manual in step-by-step detail and added screenshots and forms. You completed the procedures ahead of the deadlines that we originally agreed upon. I mean, so there's some specificity. It's a little more active. We're saying who did what. Be clear. There is a handout there called Perfect Phrases. It's just portions of a book that's also in Skillsoft, Books 24/7. I gave you a citation or a cite at the very top. In this particular example in the handout, Perfect Phrases for performance appraisal of customer relations. And we've been talking about customer service, trying to focus on customer relations. So you'll want to take a look at that if you need some examples. But I will say this, even as I looked at that, that's not perfect. Because even some of the information there is not clear. I mean, there's some summary statements. Customer relations is strength. Well, what does that mean? You know, so when I suggest that you look at examples that are available, you know, look at it with a keen eye. Be really clear about what you're comfortable with, and this is part of improvement too. So we're going to do our best at doing this and giving feedback to employees. Recognize, and you can say that to your employees, your direct reports. Just say, you know, we're all learning this. We're going to do our best. I'm not going to be perfect. You can give me feedback, and you know, we'll do the best we can. The key here is to make sure that they're meeting their goals and objectives, that we're developing them, as well as meeting the university's goals. Okay, so some common errors. And this is something that was commented on earlier. Okay, so these are errors that you'll see, and there's actually many more. I just picked out some of the more common ones that I've seen when I used to oversee employee relations, some of the things that you'd hear during the conversations. But central tendency, the manager who really doesn't have time or doesn't take the time, you don't want to be one of them. It just rates everyone in the middle. You know, it's easy, I'll just do that. Well, you know, that's not giving employees enough feedback. I mean, maybe they're not in the middle. In this case, they're going to think 3 is the middle, but 3 is not the middle, as we've talked about. 3 is very good, fully proficient. So please just remember, 3 is not the middle. Recency, primacy effect, meaning that the manager rates primarily on something that's happened recently. Oh, I hadn't thought about doing any of the evaluation, and last month this employee did really well, and now I've got to do the evaluation or the appraisal. I'm going to write them up as doing really well. That's not effective, and that's not helping the employee out. So you want to look at the whole period. Okay, the primacy effect is those managers who only remember what happened in the very beginning. I came in, I gave them their objectives, they took off and they did some things really, really well, and then I got busy and I did some other things and I didn't follow up with them through the rest of the year, and now I'm doing the review period and I don't know what they did the last 7 months. But I remember they started off really strong. So just be aware of that and don't let that happen to you. The halo horn effect, this is again something similar. Someone has strengths in one area. Oh, that person's a good writer. Okay, so I'm going to rate everything they do as really good. No. It's opposite, or the converse of that is they're weak in an area. Say someone who is late to work. Well, is that any reason to consider that they're not good at other things in their job? No. So don't look at, like I said, the positive or negatives and let that overwhelm or allow you to over-appraise the employee. Strictness, leniency, we were talking about that. There's some people say, I'm just a strict rater, and I used to think that of myself as well, very, much a high, I have high expectations and I drive people to that. Well, sometimes that can demotivate people too. And so, fortunately, if you have an employee who tells you that, I never know if I'm going to meet your expectations. Okay, well, maybe I need to modify that a little or give more feedback during the year. Leniency, too lenient, too nice of a person. You also don't want to contrast between, say I have 3 employees who have similar jobs. I shouldn't rate them, but some managers do. Okay, this person's the top, and then middle and the least, and I'm going to rate them that way. Now, rate them against your own objectives and goals and what you've set for them, because everybody will be different. Someone might be in the job 5 years, someone might be in the job for 4 months or 5 months. Think about the individual and rate them against their own objectives and goals. So some cautions. This is not meant to be a negative disciplinary action. And I put negatively specifically up there because discipline, as you know in the dictionary, could be a very neutral or positive thing. That person's very disciplined. But what's meant here is, this is not a process or a tool meant to make it easy to dismiss someone. That's not what this is about. This is really about performance development, meeting goals and expectations. The other caution, you can assume that the form that you complete, that will be viewed by others. Any comments, material that's in there, you can presume it will be viewed by others. For difficult situations, for example, if you think that someone might be very unhappy with you as a supervisor in the ratings or what they're going to see, be aware for yourself, for your coworkers, if for some reason you think that there's going to be a safety issue involved. It does happen, regardless of what industry you're in. There will be employees who are going to be very unhappy. There are techniques and ways that you can keep yourself safe as well as others. And it does require for you to contact HR and get some coaching on how you can put those things in place, whether it's to say I've got a safe word that I'll use, or we're going to contact the police, the campus police, or someone who's going to be on the outside, or someone's going to call or check in, or you're going to be in a room where you're closest at the door. There are different techniques that you might use, and that's not just with employees and performance appraisals. This might be also for difficult situations dealing with customers or the community. Okay, subjective versus objective language. You can look at this one. You see this particular sentence, your attitude indicates you don't want to be at work. That's an opinion. That's a subjective statement. Supervisor might be very right in their gut feel, but if you're the employee and someone says that to you, I mean, the first thing you might say is, well, what makes you think that? I had a problem with my dog and this morning, and so that's what happened. It's not my attitude. Be specific. Is it their behavior? Is it their conduct? Is it what they said? Is it how they said it? Be specific. Okay, so this is the area that we really want to be careful with, the last bullet point, which is the biases or the legal issues to avoid. And this happens sometimes before we know it. So if for some reason an employee has an attendance issue that impacts their ability to get their work done, talk to HR, your HR consultant. Are they on family and medical leave? The Alaska Family Leave Act might apply here where they're using leave in those two categories. Do they have a workers' comp claim? We want to factor those things in before we write, especially about their attendance. Or if they have a task to be done and they're gone for 12 weeks and they miss the deadline, that's when as a supervisor we need to work that out, because those are legally protected leave time that we really want to make sure and avoid putting it into their evaluation or to treat employees differently because of that. The different treatment, discrimination, retaliation, what you don't want to do as a manager or supervisor is find yourself treating employees differently because of race, color, national origin, age, sex, marital status, physical or mental disabilities. And sometimes it happens without people knowing about it. But by virtue of the different treatment, that is an indicator of the disparate treatment or the different treatment.
Exempt, non-exempt?
Oh, exempt, non, the question being exempt, non-exempt, can you treat them differently? Sure. Meaning, I've got this work for you to do, it's probably going to take you 80 hours this week, and so I'm going to give that to my exempt employee. I don't know whatever example you'd like to share, but for example, that particular one, sure, I can do that. Do you want to do that routinely as a manager? Well, that could impact, the employee's opinion of the university or yourself, but you want to give any examples or elaborate?
Work schedule, because with a non-exempt, a lot of the work that we do is dependent on other people providing information, and so it's when you get it that you do it. The difference is with an exempt employee, if they get it on Friday, they can turn it around over the weekend, and then they may have days off during the week or some other arrangement, more flexible schedule. Whereas with an exempt, they're really more locked into the 40-hour work week schedule and generally have more duties related to more regular frequency items, more, and so that's
the non-exempt.
Right, exactly, and that's is that considered a legal issue?
No,
Okay.
I mean, no. It's sort of like people saying, I have a receptionist that wants to be able to have a flexible schedule, and I have somebody who's exempt that can, do work from home or whatever. Can I treat them differently? Oh yeah, you can do that.
I can see though where the exempt, non-exempt might come in, because non-exempt people working a 40-hour week are very aware of what is going to then trigger overtime, and they're very aware of the clock, and when it's 5 o'clock, it's time to leave. And I could see where someone evaluating an employee, if in fact something came in and you really needed them to stay longer, or really would have liked them to stay longer, the exempt people just stay because they don't get additional compensation, and that's part of the expectation. But if a non-exempt person leaves at 5 o'clock and then you turn around and give them a more negative evaluation because they're not a team player, for instance, and the only example you could think of is, well, when 5 o'clock rolled around, we still had work to do, and they walked out the door.
That would be my expectation.
Right.
Is for exempt, but it's the flex work schedule.
Right. So it's interesting that You know, I mean, you have different people in the same office and you treat them so very differently, you know, as a result of, you know, federal laws and things like that. But yet sometimes we forget and put the same expectations on those different classifications of people when we really need to be a little bit more careful about that.
Great question, great scenario, and that's a real world situation too, because what would be helpful for the supervisor is to be able to sit down and talk about with the employee. So if there's some discretion and you say, okay, so I recognize that, you know, you may have to leave to pick up, you know, son, daughter, other commitment, whatever that might be, but you know, you don't have to say that to them, you just know it. The fact is, if you have an overtime budget that you're trying, or maybe you don't have one, which is why that's the issue, then you can say to the employee, so this is how we want to address that. If someone calls in, what you can say is this, and then could you just turn it over to me, and then you could claim that 2 minutes of overtime, or try how to tactfully close that conversation at 4:58 p.m. Right, so there's some things that we can do ahead of time so that we don't put the employee in a situation where they don't know what to do, and that's part of the development and the support that the supervisor can give to the employee, because what we will do is, as an employer, if the employee works overtime, we will pay them overtime.
Right.
And it's not, but I mean, you know, let's not put the employee in that situation. It's an excellent comment. Thank you. Okay, so that's the work assignment, wage and hour requirements. That's kind of what we were just talking about, which is, you know, if you give the assignment to the employee, remember what their status is before you have high expectations or unreasonable expectations, and to support them. Really important, let's not promise any pay raises, promotions, retentions. Sometimes supervisors, we can get overzealous and very, you know, giving and wanting to motivate employees, but we don't need to do this when we're writing or even saying to employees, you know, what might be coming down the road. Let's just, I would say you can use some of the examples or tips that I think, not this particular slide, but there are some ways that you can motivate employees. In this case, active listening, just good techniques or tips to keep in mind. Again, I'm not talking about hearing the words coming out of the employee's mouth. I'm talking about actively listening. And these are some things that you can do, any of us can do as we're meeting with people. And you know, the thing is, it's kind of interesting that people will, and it's just part of our own makeup and composition, our biases, if you will, even, that sometimes we listen to people differently, meaning you have an opinion of someone right away and you know whether you want to listen to them or not, right? And so you have to really, in this case, when you're meeting with employees on their performance review or goal setting, is really, really give that your full attention. Face the speaker. If they're telling you some information, you know, what challenges are they experiencing? Really listen. Face the speaker. Maintain that eye contact with them to the degree that's comfortable for both of you. You know, you're not staring them down, but, you know, maintain that eye contact. Minimize those external distractions. And so, you know, don't keep looking at your phone. Oh, it rings. Oh, who is that? Okay, let me pick that up. Or, you know, my phone's ringing. Oh, no, I don't need that. I mean, that sends other messages to employees or individuals meeting with you. Respond appropriately. You know, if the employee is saying something to you, you can say, you can nod your head, or you can say, I see, or, you know, you can comment, have that. What you don't want to do is nod your head if you're not really agreeing with them. So be aware of that too. So when I say appropriately, you know, make sure that if you're shaking your head or nodding your head, that you might be sending a message to the person that you agree with them, and that may not be the case. So consciously think about when someone's talking with you, whether you shake your head or I think I hear what you're saying, or, you know, however you're going to respond, just keep that in mind. Focus solely on what the speaker is saying, not, oh, I need to pick these groceries up, or, oh, I forgot to send that email out, you know, or I've got to reply back to that person and say, I got to argue with that point. You know, don't do that. Yes?
I think one of the other ways that we don't do that is a lot of times when our employee says something, rather than listen to all of what they're saying, we start thinking about what we're going to say back. So rather than listening to their dialogue and their complete issue, we're already trying to formulate how we're going to say whether we agree or disagree with them, and we stop listening. You know, where all we're doing is paying attention to ourselves. We're not
Right.
really paying attention to them.
Right.
And that's the whole idea of this.
Exactly.
And I think one way you help that is not to have the meeting, like if you have an office or in your space, is set it up in a conference room, somewhere where it's A, neutral territory, and B, you're not going to be tempted to sit there and look at your email over their shoulder or look at your other, devices, whatever. But just so that it is truly, you take it seriously. You don't have to spend hours on this, but the time that you're spending with them is at least quality time.
Yeah, those are great points. If you're in a location where you don't have a room that you can go into, where someone's going to come knocking on the door, just factor those kinds of things in, because it's really important to employees. Some employees, I don't know if you've been in that situation, but probably any of us at different times, really appreciate the time someone's given to us. When they've listened to us, they've heard us out. You can tell when people are listening to you versus whether they've got something else on their mind. Keep an open mind, and especially as we talk about performance appraisals. Keep an open mind, because sometimes when you're right up against a deadline, oh, it's June 30th, I've got to turn this in tomorrow, don't wait. First of all, as a supervisor, don't wait until that time. Keep an open mind, meaning if you plan and you do it ahead of time, you can factor in the feedback they're giving to you, and you can say, oh, okay, thank you for sharing that input. Let me think about that, and I may want to get back together with you. In fact, let's just schedule an appointment 2 days from now, and let's just plan to talk about this and then wrap this up. If we're able to do that, let's just plan to do that, and so then set that time. And then make that appointment, make that commitment. But you can keep an open mind. Employees will appreciate that you're hearing the information that they're conveying. Now, when we talked about active listening and making sure that we're listening, I'm a note taker. And so what I like to do when I'm talking with someone, I like to take notes. And that is one way to stay focused. Or recognize that. If you find that you've got too many things in your mind, maybe take notes of what the person's saying, and that also helps you kind of summarize, okay, what that person said was this. So if I heard you correctly, you actually finished that project 3 weeks ago. So let's talk about what that point is, okay? Meaning you can stay focused on the information someone's sharing with you, and paraphrase if needed for clarification. I heard you correctly, if I understood that, have your words, how you're going to say it, whatever makes sense, whatever feels real and genuine to you. Good comments, thank you. So, recognition. We talked about being kind of on this as an ongoing basis, being able to give feedback, share information. Some people are so busy they don't think about giving feedback to others. And so the key here is be genuine, be specific if you can. Catch someone doing something well. If you have to write a thank you note, some people are saying, I like to do email. Okay, that's fine too. If you send a thank you note to someone, it's amazing that people aren't used to seeing that anymore. And so, acknowledge them. Thank them for a job well done. I did have a handout there on 30 ways to say great job. And it's 2 pages. Gives you an example. If you're not, like I said, too busy, you're not as comfortable saying what you can to someone who's done some work for you, there's some examples there. One category is if someone exceeded expectations, someone who's done it fairly because you don't want to go overboard. And another area, someone just did a job well done. So you can use it. You don't have to be, again, sugarcoating something, but just to give you some examples of ways you can thank someone. Okay, so not everything's positive, right? We've talked about the easy things and giving feedback to employees, but there's also that time when we might have to give constructive feedback. So I've used this for purposes of employee relations more so because we have expectations over time with employees, and they're going to be a point in time where maybe they're truly operating above our expectations, during that honeymoon period perhaps, or maybe we just really thought that they did an excellent job. But what if at some point you say, well, they should have been getting that. They should have been able to do that. And the more time that passes, that gap gets bigger. And so as far as that, it actually makes it more difficult, in my opinion, to then address that gap, that performance gap. So really, if you're doing this performance appraisal during the year, oh, that was great work, at this point, okay, yeah, that's still good, great ideas. Maybe at some point you're saying, well, okay, that wasn't quite what I had in mind. Let's start putting our heads together here before there's a true performance gap, and then you're needing to talk to labor and employee relations about progressive discipline. So I like to say, do it early, address it. If you can say, here's how we're going to address the training, or I'll help you get past that barrier. What can I do to help you? Do that early. So why do employees not do their job? Okay, this is just a simplistic way, but you'll get the message here. So the reason employees don't do their jobs, the reason for a failure to perform, is 3 categories or reasons. They don't know what to do, they can't do it, or they won't do it. So let's look at these a little closer. They don't know what to do. One of the remedies or ways you can resolve that is just make sure you improve the communication with the employees. And whose problem is it to correct? So if the supervisor takes the primary role in trying to correct it, that'll be much more helpful. I think it'll be much more productive for the relationship. But I like to say the employee still has a responsibility to identify one, that they don't know what to do, they don't know what's expected, they don't know who to contact. The employee probably knows. They're going to try to figure it out, but at some point they're going to need to come forward. Can't do it? Might be a training issue. They don't have the resources. There's some interference or some barrier that's in their way. Supervisor has to resolve that. But the employee can also assist. And what I like to look at is employees has some role in this as well. Supervisor, I like to think, has the primary responsibility, but the employee can bring some suggestions forward. Now, if they won't do this, it might be really an attitude issue. The employee needs to change the attitude. They're in charge of that. Now, whether the attitude comes because of some unreasonable work expectations, something, maybe the employee could talk about it. But really, in this case, I put the employee as the primary. Supervisor can assist, or at some point the supervisor will have to make a decision. Might be a difficult decision to, say this is not the right role for the employee, they need to be someplace else. But employee takes the primary role in that case. Okay. So the difficult conversations, they are difficult to have. But you can plan and prepare for them. You can have talking points, outline them. I like to script them. When I was helping supervisors in a role I was in employee relations, script it out, give them the outline, whatever they needed. What are the questions? At what point will they say, okay, let me think about what you said, and then we'll get back together. They can revisit the conversation. Supervisors can do that. They have the ability to make that decision. Any of us can do that. Give yourself some lead time, though, to stay in charge or ahead of your timeline or deadlines, and be prepared to change your mind. What if the employee says something to you that was new information that you didn't know? You're in charge. You can make the decision to change your mind. But I would say, for those of us who really need some time, just say, okay, let me think about that, and then we'll get back together. Just know when you're at that point. Ask questions. Okay. So there are some materials on Skillsoft, disagreements, disputes, all-out war, simple steps to deal with any kind of conflict. These are resources available to you 24/7. We actually have some little postcards here if you'd like to take those with you. I will share some information called NLP, or Neuro Linguistics Programming, and it's really about how the brain thinks. I guess that's a simple way of saying that if you have a difficult conversation, or you're just trying to create kind of an environment where you're interacting with someone, this is kind of that way, at a more subliminal way to communicate with someone and be able to connect with them. And so the way this occurs, and so simplistically again, for you that there are at least 3 styles. There's 5, but 3 that are predominantly ones that we'll see in people. It's the visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And they say about 60% people are visual, about 29 auditory, about 5 are kinesthetic, and then the rest are probably in the other categories of olfactory or gustatory. And so the visual meaning, and you have in your handout a 2-pager that talks about visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning styles. Okay? So the way you can use this, learning styles, communication styles, difficult people, and it works. Personally used it, it works. If you have someone who is talking with you, listen. The active listening skills kick in. Listen to the words they're using as they're talking about it. Whatever the experience is, whatever the challenge is, whatever's happening, listen for the words. You can look under the category of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and you can kind of get a sense of how they're talking. And then when they get upset, what kinds of terminology are they using? And try to use that back to them, because that will actually convey to the person that you're hearing what they're saying, or you're relating to what they're saying, or you see what they're saying. And so when you're actively listening, you're hearing the story or what they're conveying, when you convey that back to them, that actually makes an impact. And I would just challenge you to give it a try. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's like mirroring. When you're sitting across from somebody, if you mirror their physical kind of nonverbal stature, what they're doing, how they're doing it, that sometimes that sends the tone of relating to the person, that you understand. So some people it works. The people who know about it, they're going to know what's going on. But the people that you really want to try to relate and try to understand, you know, it makes a huge difference. I would say definitely when emotions are high, if you give that a try, you will be amazed at how that works. May not work when you're meeting with your employee during performance appraisal, but, you know, I'd say give it a try. Doesn't hurt. It's good practice. I don't know if anybody's done that, but, you know, maybe we'd share stories afterwards if you'd like. Coaching, you know, again, there's a lot of topics in this particular hour and a half, 2-hour session, well, not 2 hours, hour and a half. Coaching. Keep in mind, and I would encourage you to look at some books on coaching, because that will set the tone of how you convey the performance appraisal. And if you're really looking out for the employee's best interest, their professional development, you're looking at ways to be positive. And for those who've been coaches before, you've been on a team and had a coach, you know, you'll see it. You know, I've seen for my son's team just different coaching styles, and you have to establish one for yourself. So the analogy or the example here is, you know, coaches don't run on the field and play the game instead of the players, but they also don't sit in the stands in back of a brick wall listening to the game on a radio. I mean, they're a little more engaged, right? And so think about ways that you want to create your coaching style. How do you want to coach your employees? And be consistent. You know, you don't want employees thinking that you're being unfair or discriminatory. So, giving you some different tools, techniques, and resources. I talked about the worksheet as a draft. If you only have a couple of employees, it may not even be, you know, necessary or come in handy. But for those who have multiple employees, it certainly can help you remember that you've done that. I would encourage an email. You have the material. You know that this is the first email that goes out. I'm going to have a conversation, a follow-up, or you talk with them first and say, oh, I just want to let you know I'm going to be sending you an email. Just use your style. Come up with it and use that. Oh, I didn't talk about the significant events log. I used to use this because when I had a number of different employees, I couldn't just always remember it. But this is just a log where you put a date and the event. And you have positive, something that didn't happen as positively, or it was a negative event even. Just so you can write it down for the year, because that then, you know, identifies for you what you're going to probably refer to at the end of the review period. And then if you have, you know, just say 6 employees and 4 of them have a full log here and 2 of them have nothing, well, then, it's time to start making an effort to go figure that out. So I'm very visual, as you can imagine, so I need those things to help, encourage me to remind me what needs to be done. So we've talked about the positive recognition, ways that we can say good job or thank you to employees, the active listening techniques, the neuro-linguistics programming, the NLP, why employees don't do their jobs. I would suggest if you get to that point where you feel like someone's not doing their job, pull that out, look at it. Just say, what could be happening here? And then what's the remedy? And what is my role? What should I do? I do have some examples of competencies and resources, meaning also as we are going through the review with employees, if we say employees need to work on change management or on decision making a little bit more, I actually have a list, a draft list. It's actually on the website though because someone wanted me to put it there, so I put it there, recognizing it's a draft. And it's basically identifying different competencies and things that you might identify in a review or performance appraisal for your employee or for yourself, that you want to work on. And then there's some, right now, there are Skillsoft courses that are online that you can look at or refer the employee to and have them report back to you as to whether it was appropriate or what they got out of the course. I started to put some of the classes from the campuses, like Steve Hines at UAA was doing something on consequential conversations. And so I was trying to start putting some of those classes here so that we could, when we identified a gap, that employees would know what they could use to then fill that gap or respond. The other thing that I have, and one of the attendees, and I'm sharing this with you because one of the attendees last week asked for some of the resources during the supervisor's class, and we have a few minutes to talk about this. For those managers or supervisors who did the benchmarks, the Center for Creative Leadership, when you received the booklet that identified areas that you might want to develop or work on, they also identified some booklets that you could buy. Well, in our resource, the Books 24/7, there are some booklets that are in Skillsoft that will address some of the factors that were identified in the survey, 360-degree feedback. So I will post that as well so you can look at it. And I would say please feel free to do that, and there's no charge to departments or employees. So just as a recap, performance appraisals are due July 1st. Just remember it's an ongoing process, so because we do it then, don't forget that we want to do this. And even in your mind, if you just say, okay, once a quarter, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about this at least once a quarter. So put it on your calendar. Let it remind you that this is something you should be thinking about, and that'll be a good tickler. Review the position description for the employee. You need to update that, so that's the other item that needs to be done before July 1st. Write those SMART goals and objectives for fiscal year 2015. If you're able to, align those with the organization's goals. That would be a really good thing to do, and I think that would show that to our upper management as well, that you have been reading the effect statements, you understand what those are, and have a better idea of how we line up with those. I would say use those tools, techniques, resources. If you have any others that you use, if you would share those with me, I would really appreciate it. That can go into the same toolbox with the others for supervisors to use. Some of them will speak or resonate more with others than some of the tools, and so please feel free to share. That's our collaboration. The resources and contacts that we have available to us for performance appraisal: Tara Ferguson, Julie Shalvoy, if you need to talk about labor and employee relations. And if you just have questions and need information about training and development resources, you can contact me. And that's it, unless you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share.